It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rob, and you're here with me for my State of the Dungeon address. This is for the game that took place on the 5th of August in the year 2021. The game, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, GUI Cube style. The campaign, the Red Star Rising in the Darkest Dream. The characters had already been having some adventures in the carnival, and this time they were actually given a little bit of a slack on their tether. They were given some liberty time because they had spent the second to the last day of carnival doing things to help out the troupe of the Hanatas. That is the somewhat gypsy-like group of entertainers that collect all of these folk who have been blessed with magical powers and disfigurement involved in something called the blood touch, as well as people who are abandoned by their families because they have crippling disfigurements or something that the family can't deal with. So they travel around entertaining people with their skills and their abilities. So the group is a bunch of young up-and-comers of the class the Frenta within the Hanatas. They are the young adults. They are the ones who are getting ready to take the next step and be full contributing members to the troupe. And since they're all trained in adventuring skills, it's multi-purpose, really. So, the group has already been having some very exciting times. They fought a brood of Verdestian vipers that had invaded their livestock pen, managing to destroy them all without losing any of their livestock, which is good. They stopped some animals that had been put into the tent of glamours to terrify the patrons. They successfully put them down and cleared out the tent. So everything that they had done so far, they'd done pretty well, although they weren't strangers to taking a bit of a beating along the way. So they need to work on their tactics a little bit, and they're also not heavily armored. Much as you might see common adventurers, they're younglings who are circus performers, effectively, so they're not very heavily armed. Or at least armored. All of them have some means of defending themselves, of course. So, they were told by the Bravda of the group, Borag, the strong, ogre-touched warrior who basically was impressed with what they'd done and sacrificed the blood that they had shed to keep their troops safe, and he gave them the rest of the night off and liberty in the morning until the actual carnival went up, where they then were supposed to continue their duties of patrolling and making sure trouble did not come on this, the last day of the carnival. They were given a short amount of time to decide if there was anything else they wanted to do that night. But for the most part, most of them were pretty willing to have a drink, eat some good food, and go to bed. Few exceptions to that were, of course, Brandel, who wished to talk to her mentors, Skizig and Vestia, who are the wizard and sorceress who are in charge of a lot of the magical effects of the carnival, and themselves run an attraction at the Tent of Illusions. But they didn't have a great deal of time for connecting. They were very proud of her, what she had done so far, but they were busy, and she had some liberty time. So other similar conversations went on. Glyn went to talk to old Stag about some information, and ended up getting an uplifting story that will help him the next time he deals with wildlife and nature, as he's feeling a little despondent about taking a beating from all these natural creatures, and he's a ranger. So But for the most part, the group ended up just going to bed. They were tired. Many of them had injuries that even if magical healing still took a bit out of them. And all of the spellcasters, I believe, were completely out of their spell slots. So it was time to rest. And they did. Every single one of them had a fitful night with a very vivid dream. Although, by the nature of dreams, one or two could only really get bits and pieces of those dreams afterwards. But they felt very real, and most of them were pretty ominous. When the group arose early the next morning, just at dawn, there were a lot of bleary eyes, and every single one of them could tell that their friends had not had a peaceful sleep. But they were determined. They had a map, which they discovered on a dead man, who was lying, having been killed by a bear, near a stash of bad alcohol the bear had gotten into. And, well, they were going to find out what this map meant. There was a note on it, too, basically hinting that something rather sinister was going on. So, the group followed the track on the map, and Glyn, of course, was in his element. He is a ranger, and he's a very adept ranger. He led them along the relatively short track to the ruins of a field house. It was apparently a small homestead. There was a separate chamber with a well, and the buildings were ruined. There was just some stone foundation that was left, a bit of a chimney that was still intact that went unexplored, and there was a well that was partially screened by a building that had protected it once upon a time, but now it was exposed to the elements and looked pretty overgrown. The entire place had been reclaimed by nature rather well. Hananan went exploring around the ruins of the farmhouse and ended up partially falling into the rotten floorboards because they didn't see that there was a cellar underneath. When Brandel went over to try to help him, she was so eager to try to help him, she wasn't careful herself, and she plunged into the cellar, which did a little bit of damage, nothing too serious, a little twisted ankle. But it was an unpleasant experience that left her stranded in the cellar. There really wasn't anything in there. She searched around with the help of the others after a bit, and found nothing more than some crushed crockery and an old rusted frying pan. No, most of their attention was drawn to the well, which was investigated thoroughly by Crendon and Vanessa. Of course, Crendon the bard and Vanessa is the druid. They determined between them that there had been some traffic to this well, and there had been obvious signs that something had gone into the well or come out of the well, as the lichen had been disturbed, and up to fairly recently. This piqued their curiosity, and they also found that there was a piton anchored into the base of the well that a stout rope could be tied to. So Vanessa ran off. Vanessa can kind of be in a world of her own, so she came back with 2 10-foot lengths of rope. That really wasn't going to provide them with a lot of rope. The well descended further than the characters with dark vision could see using that talent. So it was clearly further than 60 feet. So they, once again, somebody ran back to the camp, came back with a 50-foot length of rope. And then became a little routine which I call tempting fate. First of all, Crendon went down the well, climbing down the rope. Rope gives you advantage to climb, so he was doing quite fine. But then he got to the bottom of the rope, and there was still more well to go. So he thought he would cling to the wall and scale down. The wall was described as being damp and mossy. Not something that gives a great purchase. And he fell, slipped, fell 20 feet and took some damage. And was left in a oozy, mucky floor. It wasn't pleasant. And there he is down in the dark. Now, he has dark vision, so he wasn't too discomfited. But he could tell that one side of the wall, the bottom of this well, had been excavated out. Something had forced its way through the wall. And while he had no information about what might have done this, he could see that there was a tunnel going further along, and this was actually a built structure. Not just a random cave, not just an animal warren. This was an actual corridor. Also, he heard an ominous scrape coming from down the tunnel. At this point, Glenn decided he was going to try to climb down and see what he could do. He came down with a 10-foot length of rope. And he climbed down with ample dexterity. And he wrapped the end of the rope around his leg, turned his body around, and tied the 10-foot length to the bottom of the rope. That still ended up leaving a gap of about 15 feet before the bottom of the well, though, which was kind of unfortunate. The others threw the other 10-foot length of rope down, because if there's, only an 8-foot gap between the end of the rope and the floor, you can at least extend your arm's length and drop, and you aren't going to take any damage. Would make it a little bit more difficult to climb back up, but so be it. Well, the throw wasn't good. The rope missed them and splashed. This is while Crendon was trying to climb back up again, up to the rope. Because remember, he was beaten up and sounds like there's something down there. Well, Crendon came back down, grabbed the rope, threw it up to Glenn, who caught it again adeptly, and he tied that length of the rope on. And he climbed down the rest of the way to join Crendon. The rest of the group decided that, instead of tying this rope, which wastes a certain amount of length of the rope to make these knots, and may not be quite as secure, they reeled up the rope and attempted to cast mending on the ends of the rope to make a longer rope, which doesn't work because they weren't severed. These are two separate pieces of rope that were never joined at the same place. But since I figured there was a pretty good chance that they just bought one big spool of rope and then cut it as they needed, as it turned out, the two 10-foot lengths were actually of a piece. So they fused those together, so they have a 20-foot length of rope and a 50-foot length of rope. To get down the 70-foot length, plus the length that goes over the edge of the rim, they can now get down to about 6 feet, which everybody accepts is long enough, 6 feet away from the bottom of the well. And at this point, they start climbing down. Now, at this point, Brandel has read what her apprentice ring does. She was given this apprentice ring by Vestia after successfully sorting out the Tent of Glamours with the wild animals. And she has access to a single casting of a lot of very useful first-level spells. One of which being Featherfall. So she had that in her back pocket. But she ended up making the climb down relatively easily. It wasn't a very difficult climb. The walls of the well were rough, and they had a rope, so they were rolling with advantage. So everybody made it down just fine, especially Hananan, who it should be lauded that he made an incredible roll and basically did it using just the muscles of his 2 fingers to climb down. He was that good. So now everybody's down at the bottom of the well. It should also be noted that poor Glynn and Crendon watched them pull the rope up while they were down there, wondering, what the heck are they doing? Are they leaving us here? That was when they mended the rope. So, that was funny. So there they are, looking at the corridor. And then, after a lot of talking, they start walking down the corridor. They tend to discuss things quite a bit, as do most parties that I have ever run for. They go down the corridor, which looks like there's some rubble, some debris, but it doesn't look like it's in imminent danger of collapse. But they do see that there are some drag marks along the right side of the corridor. There are what look like footprints, but they're round, going along through the tunnel. And they find some scratches on the wall. The scratches read out a warning that death was coming down the corridor. Run! Flee, you fools! Well, they weren't going to flee. Adventuring parties are tough, right? But they could see at the end of the corridor there was a door that was hanging off its hinges. Right at the end by a T intersection that went left and right at the end. And they could see that a pink mist was issuing out through the doorway. So the group was on their alert. They heard the scraping, scratching sounds and sounds of skittering. None of that sounded good to adventurers who are going through a dungeon, or honest to goodness dungeon crawl in the middle of the story. So they get to the end of the hall. They look to the left, they look to the right, nothing's moving. Good. To the right, so the corridor turns. To the left, the corridor widens, maybe into a room. Quiet. Now they're seeing down this because they have a couple of members with dark vision. The other people who are not equipped with dark vision have a light spell cast by Brandel, which cantrip. Yay. But it only provides 20 feet of light. That's bright, so again, it's not ideal, but they're getting by. They get to the door, and eventually curiosity overwhelms them, and they open the door, which is crazily swinging from its hinges. It was burst open from within. It was clearly designed to keep something in, but it's failed. So, they open the door. Inside is a large room, some 25 feet across by 25 feet. It's made of stone, worked stone all the way around. At the far end is some sort of a pictograph in the wall with some writing by it. And the floor is covered with a pink mist. The entire air smells sickly sweet, undoubtedly from the pink mist. But it didn't seem to be having any kind of an effect on them. So they were discussing what to do when Crendon got bored. Crendon is an impulsive scamp. He decides he's going to walk across the room and look at the pictogram. Whereupon he hits the pit trap in the middle of the room. 10-foot pit. He dropped. Now remember, Crendon already had a close brush with gravity, where he lost about half of his hit points from a fall. So this fall didn't really do him any favors, but he wasn't alone. The creature in the pit was waiting for them because it could hear them. And when he fell, it leaped, and it fanged him, and he was knocked unconscious from the injury and dying. Now the rest of the group saw him fall, and they're like, oh, Crendon. And then they heard him yelp and sound like he dropped to the ground, dead or unconscious. And immediately they were worried for their boon comrade, their troop brother. They started thinking about how to shoot. Not immediately how to run over and help him, see how he's all right, he'll know. They were going to provide covering fire first. Well, then Hananan came to grips with his need to protect. And he saw where he had fallen, so he moved up, made his dexterity save to predict where the edge of the pit was. Jumped down, hand planted on the edge of the pit, and dropped himself over. This was after he adeptly, from the time that Crendon fell to where he hit the ground, because they all heard the splat, he figured it was only a 10-foot drop. He's dropped from 10 feet before. So he vaults over the side, weapon at the ready, because he heard something attack, and he lashes in. The creature is actually a large, bony, undead-ish spider. Creepy as heck, with a mouth full of needle-sharp fangs and It's just nasty. Its eyes are dead white that reflect light. And it has two in the front, it has some in the sides. It's alien and disturbing and very nasty and very hungry. And he delivers a blow to it. But he doesn't take it down. This thing is pretty tough. So the others are spurred into action by his movements. Most notably, Brandel decides she's going to go over and try to help. Because when Glenn moves up, can't see anything. The pit is full of pink fog. He can't see what's down there. So he's sitting there with his bow, just ready if he can get a shot. But he doesn't know where Crendon is, and he doesn't know where whatever is attacking him is, and now he doesn't know where Hananan is. So he's holding and looking for an opportunity. As a matter of fact, I think he fired an arrow, but missed because firing blindly. But Brandel goes down into the mist. Not voluntarily. She failed her dexterity save and face planted. She ran off the edge and down into the pit. But that was just her movement action. So she looks up and there's this big nasty spider thing, and there's Hananan fighting it by himself. There's Crendon down on the ground and not looking good. What does she do? Witch Bolt. Bzzzt. And she starts frying it. She hits, does impressive damage, and she is locked to the monster by her sorceress connection of the spell. Blue lightning is playing across its body. If you've actually seen the end of The Return of the Jedi, where the Emperor is frying Luke, it's a lot like that. And she's just zapping it. Well, Spider didn't like that very much, but she is illuminating it, and the bright glow from the lightning is shining through. So, Glenn's like, hey, I got a target. Thwack! And he punches an arrow right through its midsection. This was the most damage that it had taken from a single strike. He's pretty good with his bow. I think we've said that before. And he delivers a meaty blow. Well, the spider decides it can't do anything about that right now. But he doesn't like the idea that she's going to keep lightning bolting him. So it turns around and it fangs Brandel. Remember, Brandel had had a little bit of an injury, but she's a first level mage. It's a big nasty undead spider. Fang. After she had already fallen into the cellar and fallen into this pit, and its fangs knocked her cold and dying again. So, 2 party members down. Partially from gravity, partially from this nasty. And Hananan just could not connect. This thing's hide was thick like a person wearing a suit of chain armor. He couldn't deal any damage. That's when Vanessa showed up. Vanessa, of course, is the druid. She has a sickle. She has a dagger. She has dart. She is not a melee powerhouse. She is not a ranged powerhouse, but she's quite magical. But she decided to freelance this time. She goes up. She's like, I know where it is, right? I said, you know where it was. And it's still pink mist. She's like, I'm just going to throw a dagger down there anyhow to help out. Okay, you're at disadvantage because you can't see it. Something like a 17 and an 18. They're just ridiculous. She hits it. Max damage, exactly as many hit points as it had. Tunk. Spider dies. Okay, so that's how it ended. The druid killed it. Pay attention, this will come back. So the group goes down, and this time they look over the scene of carnage. 2 party members down, both in a dying state. Neither of them had stabilized. Vanessa is still a little unfamiliar with her spells, so she wanted to cast Goodberry because she could split the healing up between the 2, and quite honestly, it provides more healing than her other alternative healing word can do. But I looked at her and I said, if they roll a 1 on a death save, they're going to die. They're in that bad of shape right now. So she used Healing Word on Hananan, Crendon, got him up and healthy again. Then she healed up Brandel. So both were upright. Both were actually in pretty decent shape, all things considered. It worked out fairly well for them in the end. The creature was dead, and they were the victors. Surely that was fine. Of note, one of Hananan's swings went wild and smashed into the ground and made a loud noise. This would come back. But now it's time to look around. First of all, they examined the spiders. They realized that the spiders were partially alive, but also partially necrotic undead. Some necromancer did something really bad to a spider at one point, and this is the product of that. It's genius for a person to be able to basically create a necrotic life form that's not a zombie. It still needs to eat, but as an undead, it's got an incredibly long life, and yeah, it's got all kinds of nasty elements to it. It's a pretty vicious monster. Brandel remembered of rumors of a creature that was created, an abomination in these parts called an arachnic revenant. Seemed to be what it was. Both her and Vanessa, who realized that it was originally based off of some sort of giant spider, felt that there was something more they should know, but just couldn't pin it down. They didn't roll the ridiculously high number to get any more than that. And Glynn couldn't figure out how any of this could be harvested for anything useful. There was no edible meat. They slit open its stomach, and all it had were juices, so this thing was not designed for eating flesh. Very much they predicted that these things would drain prey, just all their fluids. Not a good way to go, certainly. But they got out of the pit. They explored around. They also explored the pit just to make sure there wasn't any treasure lying around or anything they missed, and they didn't. They looked at the pictograph, and the pictograph was a warning. Again, big nasty spiders are here. So they are now warned. However, because of the dinner bell that Hananan inadvertently rang when he clanged his sword into the ground, there are more of those things, and one of them poked its head through the door trying to be all stealthy and get at the party from behind. It didn't roll well. And Hananan was not one who had been talking about all the different things he was going to look at and examine and commiserate with. So he was standing right by the door when this thing came through, and it didn't notice him. So he hit it hard. Whack! The rest of the group turned and started teeing off. Turns out that these things may not have the best saving throws in the world, so when Vicious Mockery was employed by Crendon, it took effect, and the thing felt very bad about being a subpar undead spider. But the others lashed out at it with a fury, again, pegging it with an arrow, again, hitting it with Burning Hands, which was pretty daring considering Hananan was in melee with it, but she hit it and did some damage. All told, they piled damage on top of damage until, down to single hit points and not having a lot of fun, Vanessa came up, threw a dagger, critical hit, doing exactly the amount of damage that she needed to kill it. I think it was like 8 points. Thwack! Dead. Vanessa is the spider killer. But then its body got knocked away and another one was in the doorway. Now they were using the doorway to keep it from getting in and attacking anybody it wanted to. Hananan was pretty much front and center. And when he was bitten, he's the fighter. He was able to take it and still weather its poison. And he's doing okay. But here's the thing. Again, the spider has some cover. Those people using missile weapons, like Crendon using his hand crossbow, or Glynn firing his bow, it's a little congested. It's a little cumbersome. Not having an easy time. There's a couple of missed shots so they don't hit their teammates. But they do rack it with a volley of magic missiles, which really set it up, doing a lot of damage. And then the rest of them chipped away at it until it was down to single-digit hit points. And Vanessa pulls out a dart. When it's down to 5 hit points, she throws her dart at disadvantage, hits it, doing 5 points of damage. Kills that one with the exact number count, too. Dice are funny. Dice are just funny. So she took the killing shot on all of them by exact damage. So they're all dead. And well done, too. The group didn't take tremendous amounts of extra damage, although they might want to take a short rest so that they can bandage wounds and stuff. I hope they remember that mechanic. It would be good for them to know that. They did go back out into the hall, because I think they were still feeling like they were doing okay, and they went to the southern corridor, went around and found that it had caved in completely. This is where they would have met those 2 arachnic revenants that piled on after their fight in the pink mist room. I just pulled them from there so they weren't surprised by that encounter. So they're gone. So they come back, and now they're contemplating going into the northern chamber. Although again, 1 or 2 of them might want to take a short rest. I think it would just help because I think somebody needs some bandaging, and Arcane Renewal, getting first level spell back for the wizard might be a good idea. Just something to think about as they are preparing to continue on into the dungeon below the old well. Now, of course, you might think to yourself, okay, well, they know that this is here, and why are they continuing? Remember, these creatures are only a few hundred feet away from the wagons their troop lives in. So these things, if they've been coming up and out, they could have run off with any of the youngsters of the tribe. They might have attacked some members of the camp. So they are actually protecting their troop and doing a really good job. Now, I had recorded the prior 2 sessions. Things were a little awkward, a little herky-jerky. The flow wasn't ideal. But now the players are really getting into it. And when I turned the camera off, I think everybody just kind of kicked into gear, and we had a marvelous night. It was a really good session, which I think everybody picked up their game quite a bit. Crendon is getting into his tethers of making sure the action continues to move forward, even sometimes at his own cost. Glyn is learning about tactics and using his excellent range skills and his nature skills to help out the group with what he knows and what he can do. Hananan is learning to be a person of action and charging in to protect his teammate and delivering devastating damage up close. Brandel has been using her spells quite effectively. The group has benefited from her being able to do that. Even though she's taken a bit of damage, she's shown that she's willing to take risks alongside of everyone else. And, of course, everyone is being kept alive by Vanessa, who is the combat champion of the group with all the death blows she's been dealing. But for being Johnny on the spot and actively throwing himself in danger appropriately to somebody who has the urgency to save a party member, I would like to commend Brendan, the player of Hananan, and the next time we play, you will be getting a gooey reward for your character for your bravery and selflessness. I've decided that you were the MVP of the night. And what will that give him? Who knows? But a nice little bonus that'll hopefully help him out sometime down the road. Anyhow, this game has been a lot of fun. My players are they sound very, very happy with the game. They love the handouts and everything. If you have not yourself gotten a chance to try a Gooey Cube adventure, I highly recommend looking them up. The quality is off the charts as far as the art, the presentation, the handouts, the depth of the campaign is very solid, and I highly recommend it. It also helps that we have themed food along the way. We had Barovian butterscotch pudding from the Heroes Feast D&D cookbook, thanks to Chrissy, the player of Brandel, and I made mushrooms and bacon, which is one of my favorite concoctions to mix up for everybody, which has always been one of my favorite festival foods anyhow. So, it was fun. It's a great group, and we're having a good time. So thank you for joining me. I am Rob, and this has been another State of the Dungeon address. Hopefully you'll join us for more as they continue in the Red Star Rising campaign. Thank you, and farewell.